the photographs, the first thing you notice is what should not be there. Light. A roof of glass spanning a space the size of a cathedral nave, flooding the platform with daylight. Beneath it, iron ribs rise in perfect curves, disciplined as geometry. And then you see the date, late 19th century, and the question arrives on its own. What exactly were these stations built to do? If you were raised on the usual industrial picture, coal smoke, grime, soot-black ceilings, these halls feel out of place. They do not look improvised. They do not look like the first draft of a new technology. They look complete, almost ceremonial, like something a city inherits when it becomes important enough to deserve it. Railways did not begin with palaces. Early terminals were plain sheds and cramped depots. Yet within a few decades, major capitals competed to build iron and glass halls that dwarfed older civic buildings. St. Pancras in London, Gare du Nord in Paris, Antwerp Central, great American depots like St. Louis Union Station. These places were not only entry points, they were public statements about order, speed, and power. The obvious explanation is progress. New materials, new industry, new money. That is true, but it avoids the most interesting layer. These stations were not just buildings, they were assemblies of engineering, structures designed to carry loads, manage crowds, move freight, and coordinate machines. And the more you look past the facades, the more the stations begin to resemble devices rather than monuments. Start with the roof itself. A train shed was closer to a bridge than a cathedral. By the 1860s and 1870s, iron production had scaled up into standardized beams, plates, and trusses. Components could be fabricated off-site, shipped by rail, then hoisted with steam winches and cranes, and riveted in place by teams trained to work fast. The impossible spans were often the result of repetition, proven truss patterns, known curvature, practice crews. The miracle was not magic, it was manufacturing. So far, the story is impressive, but comprehensible. Then you look down, not up. Under platforms and behind walls, many major terminals contained a second architecture: tunnels, vaults, shafts, and thick pipes. Not the thin plumbing of a public building, but infrastructure meant to move force. Freight lifts that could raise loaded wagons, capstans that could pull cars through tight spaces, turntables and traversers shifting rolling stock with controlled power. Equipment that today we would assume is electric or hydraulic, because in many places it already was hydraulic. This is where the standard industrial image collapses into something more precise. We tend to imagine the 19th century as a binary, muscle or steam, but cities had a third option, widely used before electricity became universal. They used pressurized water to transmit power. High-pressure water power was practical urban technology. Water under pressure could deliver energy through pipes the way electricity would later move through cables. Pumping stations, reservoirs, and accumulators storing pressure could feed cranes, lifts, dock gear, and railway machinery across whole districts. For a station, this offered something valuable: controlled force without smoke, without sparks, without a boiler in every corner. When you dig into period descriptions of railway yards and terminals, the same kinds of installations keep appearing: valve rooms, pressure mains, hydraulic lifts, water-powered capstans. Often the station did not invent the system from scratch. It connected to a wider municipal network already serving docks and warehouses. Suddenly, the station stops looking like a single building and starts looking like a node, one part of an urban machine. This also changes how you read the early photographs. A hall can be bright and relatively clean if the heaviest work is pushed underground and driven by water pressure instead of open furnaces inside the structure. The soot and smoke of the era were real, but the dirtiest labor could be kept out of the ceremonial spaces. Passengers saw glass, light, and order. The machinery was there, but it lived below. And it clarifies another pattern that feels eerie until you remember how cities function. Why do so many major stations sit near rivers, canals, or docks, even when land was expensive? Geography is part of it. Railways wanted flat approaches, room for yards, and access to freight corridors that already followed water. But water was also infrastructure, a reliable supply for boilers, cleaning, fire protection, and, in some contexts, hydraulic power. Building near water reduced friction. It made the station easier to supply, easier to expand, and easier to integrate into a city's working bloodstream. Even the fountains that cluster around grand terminals begin to look different. In the 19th century, public waterworks were civic pride. A fountain at the entrance was not only decoration, it was a symbol that the city had mastered pressure, supply, and sanitation. Modernity made visible. Sometimes the spectacle was backed by real mechanical systems nearby. Sometimes it was pure propaganda. Either way, water was part of the language of progress. Then comes the question your competitor tries to answer with a single word and a conspiracy. If these hydraulic systems existed, why do they seem to vanish from public memory? They didn't vanish. They were outcompeted. As electrical networks expanded, the logic flipped. Water power required heavy pipes, constant pumping, careful sealing, and winter precautions. Leaks were expensive. Pressure dropped with distance. Maintenance was relentless. Electricity could be distributed with less physical bulk, controlled at the point of use, and scaled rapidly once the grid existed. Instead of sending power through water and converting it into motion on site, you could send power through a wire and drive a motor directly. So equipment was redesigned, lifts were refitted, yard machinery modernized, valve rooms became storage rooms, tunnels were sealed for safety, and once the station evolved, the old system stopped being photographed, discussed, or remembered by passengers. Infrastructure disappears from culture the moment it stops being noticed. There is another reason the archives can feel strangely thin. Stations were never stable objects. Fires, expansions, wartime damage, and constant upgrades shredded continuity. Engineering drawings were working documents, not sacred relics. Companies merged, folded, moved offices, lost records. The public face, the roof and facade, was celebrated and preserved. The service spaces were treated as replaceable. And yes, there is a pattern across countries, not because there was a hidden civilization, but because railways were global by design. Engineers read the same journals, attended the same exhibitions, copied details that worked, and hired the same kinds of firms. Standardization can look like mystery when you expect every city to invent everything from scratch. Still, some stations carry a sense of over-engineering, vaults deeper than you expect, corridors that lead nowhere today, walls thicker than modern needs. Sometimes that is planning for growth. Sometimes it is a later building layered on older infrastructure, and sometimes it is simply the residue of an age that believed public works should be built beyond immediate necessity because a station was more than transport. It was a promise about the future. That is the part worth lingering on. Modern terminals are optimized to process signage, retail, security, flow. The 19th century station was designed to announce its staged arrival. It used architecture to make movement feel like destiny, and it hid its working parts, hydraulic, steam, mechanical, just far enough away that the public could experience the building as calm. So the unsettling feeling these halls produce is not evidence of a lost super technology. It is evidence of a lost relationship with infrastructure. A time when cities were willing to spend empire-level money on public engineering and to wrap machinery in beauty as if it mattered. If you want to find the hidden station, don't look for forbidden names in the margins of history. Look for seams between eras, a bricked-up arch in a basement corridor, a locked stairwell behind a service door, an inexplicably thick wall beside a platform. These are the places where the 19th century is still speaking, not in myths, but in engineering choices. And one question remains, quiet but sharp. If our ancestors could build transport halls that still command a room, why did the century that followed choose to build smaller, plainer, more disposable spaces? We did not lose the ability to construct. We lost the ambition to treat public movement as something worth honoring. The next time you walk into a grand old station, listen to what it asks of you. Not belief, attention,